listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. It's not just a job. It's not just a paycheck. Or at least it doesn't have to be. With the help of experts across industries, Dirk helps you find your passion and career, as well as exposing the unknown parts of every vocation. Let's go deep. Let's find your genius zone right now. Here's Dirk Nevelle.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Dirk Nevelle, and on with me is Paul Schneiderman. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Dirk, for having me on, and congratulations on your new podcast.
Thanks, my friend. Real quick, college is, it's a great opportunity. Paul and I met back at the University of Washington, and although Paul and I haven't hung out a lot in recent years, with social media, you get the advantage of following people and seeing how they're going and they're doing in their career. And Paul's a guy that I know is really successful as an attorney. And he's also carved out kind of a really cool, I don't want to call it a hobby, but maybe a second love having to do with podcasting. And some of the folks he's been interviewing over the years are pretty impressive athletes that are real recognizable to this community. But this podcast, I know you're tuning in. We're going to first kind of touch on law and the different routes and the one Paul is involved with. And we'll get into the weeds on kind of that lifestyle. And then we'll also touch on the whole podcasting gig that Paul is involved with. But I will stop rambling and kind of throw it back to Paul. And Paul, maybe in your own words, you can talk a little bit about how long you've been in law, what kind of law you specialize in. And then just maybe a little about your career, like have you bounced around private practice, things like that?
Well, Dirk, again, I'm honored and humbled to be on your podcast, and welcome to the podcast family. And it's nice to be with you, and I'll continue to follow your podcast as well now that I'm aware of it. I grew up in Seattle. I graduated from Seattle U Law School back in '97. And I went on my own as a lawyer. I went solo back in 2000. I was still in my 20s when I decided to become a solo lawyer. And there are all sorts of reasons I decided to do that. And so I've been a solo lawyer now for over 23 years. Most of my work is primarily in the area of plaintiffs' personal injury, where I represent injured people with claims. I handle a few other cases, an occasional business litigation case. Occasionally, I'll hit on a criminal law case, but probably 90% of my work these days is in the personal injury torts area, we call it.
So so 97 is when you got out of law school, is that right?
That's correct.
And you're below me. So I got out in 92 at UW. Were you 93?
That's correct.
And then you jumped right into law school?
Pretty much. I took a year off. I actually had an interesting experience before I started law school. I worked at Nordstrom's for a couple months. And that I learned a lot doing that. And so, but I took the LSAT the fall after I graduated, and didn't probably have the most productive year before I started law school. But I did jump in the summer of '94 at Seattle U Law School. Cool. And I was not top of my class or anything, but I think I got a good legal education there. And yeah, just you kind of get out of law school and you're sort of off for the races. Everyone goes through law school and takes the bar together and takes similar courses in law school. But once you're done, I mean, again, you are really thrown out there, and you got to kind of try to figure it out one way or another.
So real quick, that's interesting. My first real job was at Nordstrom's. I was 14, and they dressed me up as a bellman or whatever, and I had to open up doors for the sales. And then I eventually got into stock, and then I would do outside sales during like the Christmas holiday sales. So I was there probably a good 15 years off and on, but I did learn a lot as well. I mean, Nordstrom, I don't know, were you in Seattle or Bellevue, or which one?
I was at the Bellevue Square shop for not a very short time. I probably was not the best salesman in the world. My ADD side would come out a bit. I mean, I was good if I had time to spend with an individual customer, but it was kind of overwhelming to me to like have 20 people want help right away. I was kind of like, it got a little, but I did learn a lot, but doing that before I started law school. So.
I remember my first year, I think it was sportswear or furnishings, and I was sales, and I was young, and I couldn't figure out the register. And this guy he knew I was kind of wigging out, and he's like, "Hey, listen, take a breath." I go, "This is just clothes. It's not a big deal. It's not life serious stuff. And I always remember that because like I wanted to be really good at it. But anyways, Nordstrom's was a good kickoff for me as well. So getting back to law, we talked a little bit about before we started this podcast is, a lot of my friends got into law. Was that something like, what was was that a voice in your head? Like, I want to be a lawyer? Was it parental stuff? You didn't waste any time and you jumped right into it. What was behind that?
Dirk, I'll tell you what, grew up in Northeast. So my late dad was an attorney and my late grandpa on my mom's side was an attorney. I had an uncle was an attorney, an aunt was an attorney. So I grew up with the law and I grew up with hearing about legal cases, hearing about legal issues. And so I guess it's sort of a genetic thing, but I always found the law interesting because as we know in today, so many current events have something to do with the law. And so that part of it has always interested me. Say, even if I don't practice, say, an environmental law, I can read about an environmental issue and kind of pick up on some legalities, even if it's not my area of law. So I always kind of had a natural fascination with the law and the advocacy part of it and some of the details of it. But I want to share some with you, Dirk. I was not the best student growing up. I got diagnosed with ADD and dyslexia when I was very young. And so I had to work pretty hard in school to be able to get through college and get through law school. And so even though I grew up the child of an attorney and the grandson of an attorney, the school academic part of it wasn't always easy for me growing up.
I can relate. That's interesting. I think that's a big issue right now. So again, people are tuning in because they want to know a little bit about the world of law, but I just have to ask, you're a third generation law person, legal person. I don't know what the right way to phrase that is. Did you feel pressure? Like, did you ever have interest to do something else? Or was it a desire to get into this field? Or did you feel like, gosh, I have to be because my grandparents or my grandpa and my dad, et cetera, like I can't go a different route?
That's an excellent question. And it was really something I wanted to do. And it was something that it was sort of a self-competition thing that I want to get through law school. I want to do this. And I never got pressure. My father died when my sister and I were teenagers, so I never had deep conversations with him about the idea of going to law school. But he was never he never pushed it growing up. I remember one time my dad said we need more scientists than lawyers. So my grandfather, who we had a great tie, he died back in 2003. He never pushed me going to law school. So I never got pushed by anybody. If anything, I probably had more people try to dissuade me from going. I'm sorry to cut you off. That's interesting because I was, again, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I was going to, no.
I think part of this podcast is really getting into the heads of people that don't have life wisdom. Like you and I, we have some years behind us. And so I didn't know if you had any gold or wisdom you wanted to throw at people that may be in a situation where they feel the pressure to follow suit. And they're like, maybe their heart is somewhere else, but it sounds like you are more than willing.
Yeah, and here's one more thing I want to throw in here. You'll find this interesting. My late aunt, her name was Debbie Aaron, and she sadly passed at age 52 in 2002. And Debbie was a real pioneer as a woman lawyer. She was I think she was the first woman associate at a prominent Seattle firm, Williams Castor Gibbs. Anyhow, Debbie practiced law for over a decade. She ended up going into what we can call the Lawyers in Transition movement. She became a nationally known counselor for helping lawyers who are considering career transitions. So I actually grew up with an aunt who had, as you can tell, a somewhat ambivalent view about the practice of law because she specialized in helping lawyers who wanted to get out or find different careers, or she also would help lawyers find career choices from within. So when I would tell people I'm Debbie Aaron's nephew, people would go, "And you went to law school? You're Debbie Aaron's nephew?" But your question made me think, because if anything, was probably a little more cynicism about going to law school and within some family circles.
Do you remember anything she told you that stuck out?
Well, a couple things, and she was a very bright woman. Went to UW and UCLA Law School. Very, very smart. She told me that you're going to see the practice of law involves a lot of administrative aspects. You know, you go through law school and you think you're going to be arguing Supreme Court cases. You're going to be getting these most fascinating kind of cases. You can get some of those types of things, but it really is a lot of just kind of common sense, handling your trust account, making sure your bills get paid, making sure you're following the legal ethics rules, making sure you're calling the clients to make sure the ship doesn't sink, things like that. So that's something she shared with me, Dirk, that you're going to find that a lot of practice law is administrative stuff. And that's very true.
Well, this is perfect because I want to get into the weeds about, people watching TV and all these law shows, and they're like, oh man, this is funny, or this is cool, this is sexy, this is exciting. Let's get into the real world of law. And I don't know if that would change, the answer would change based off the type of law you're involved with. So let's, I guess for now, focus on your specific type of law.
Yeah. Like I said, most of my work is on the plaintiff's personal injury side. And what that sort of means in plain English is I represent people who have an injury claim. Many of these cases get resolved before a lawsuit's ever filed. Occasionally there can be a trial or an arbitration hearing, but I usually represent, at one time I was on the insurance defense side where I defended those types of claims, but for the last 23 plus years, I've been representing the claimants, or the plaintiffs, we can call them. And
Okay.
A lot of it is working with the client, assessing the case, getting their medical bills, getting witnesses lined up. A lot of it involves those aspects. There's some occasional legal issues that definitely come up, and what parties to include in a possible suit. So you have a lot of that analysis, but there's definitely an administrative side to it as well.
So private practice, you jumped right into that, right? After Seattle U.
I did. I had a couple contract lawyer stints. I call it as like my residency after law school. I had a couple, and they weren't the most wonderful jobs, but I learned a lot at each job. And I made a decision at age 29, based on a confluence of circumstances, to go out on my own. And I kind of saw some of the realities that working at a firm can be very good for some people, but for some people, going on your own can give you a little more autonomy, can allow you to do things a little more your way. I mean, there's pros and cons. It's not always easy. So, but I've been on my own now for over 23 years.
Okay. So for people that don't have, like, say, friends or family that can educate them on what to expect, when you're in law school, was it 3 years?
3 years of law school. That's correct.
Okay. And then during that time, did you have chance to like intern and learn, or were you strictly school?
That I'll tell you about law school. Law school is heavily theoretical. It's very academic. You're learning a lot of policy. A lot of the law professors, some have practice experience, but a lot of them kind of look at law more from a theoretical. It's almost like a PhD program in some ways. They're into the doctrine and the policy behind it. So law school, I took a couple clinical classes. I did do an internship in law school at one firm. I did an externship, they called it, one summer in the King County Prosecutor's Office. But most of law school is more classroom oriented. It's more learning case law and policies. And it has much more of an appellate law angle to it. You're reading a lot of these sort of esoteric cases and Supreme Court cases. And it's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily apply to what a lot of lawyers are doing daily.
So if someone's like wanting to go to law school, they're dead set on it, are they going to be able to, let's say they have a family or they have to work to pay the bills, is it going to be like college? Is it during the working hours, or do you have to go to night school for law school? Like, what kind of flexibility and freedom should one expect if they go down this road?
Well, a lot of law schools, I think there's about 200 ABA approved law schools. There's also some non-American Bar Association approved law schools. California has a lot of those. About 200 ABA approved law schools. Some of those schools, including Seattle U Law School, offer a part-time program. So there are attorneys that can work and go to law school part-time. But most law school students, especially the first 2 years, they are not working. They are full-time law students, especially that first year. And the second year is a lot of work too. But there are options, part-time options for people. But not every law school, I believe, has a part-time program, but I haven't followed it extremely closely in recent years.
Okay, so that's good to know. I mean, for some, it's a full-on commitment early on, especially since you may not want to fall behind, right? So let's fast forward a little bit. Okay, so you get into private practice and you made the decision to do that. And, you know, you and I are close to age, so we have some years behind us, but walk us through like what it's like, you know, I mean, it's got to be kind of similar to just starting a business, you know, where you're wearing all these hats in terms of marketing yourself, paying the bills, getting your license, all the admin. Walk us through the first couple of years on what it's like to run your own practice in the world of law.
Oh yeah, that's very true, Dirk. It's a lot of, it does have a marketing aspect. It has a follow through aspect to it, administrative aspect, technology aspect. Yeah, I can have days where I'm writing legal memorandums and I'm practicing law. I also have days where I'm definitely trying to run the business as well. So it has all those aspects to it. But you know, technology has changed a lot, especially the last couple of years, where it's pretty incredible how much you can practice law from your cell phone on a laptop. You can do a lot of legal research on your laptop now. So to practice law these days, you don't really need that much. You don't need the same, I guess we can call it infrastructure as say some other fields. Like, I mean, you can't practice medicine, you know, from only a cell phone or a laptop, you know. So I guess if you're a psychiatrist, maybe you could to some extent, but a lot of fields you have to have other I guess pieces of technology, but law, you can be pretty minimal with what you need these days.
Yeah, no, you're right. So, you know, you were joking about it, but you talked about ADD, right? And I think that's common. All these different things you had to kind of be, I want to say an expert, but you had to be proficient in. With ADD, was it hard? Like I can't imagine like reading law. Like I have a hard time with IKEA when I have to put together a piece of furniture. Like I think I have it, but like with ADD and trying to focus on the legal verbiage and the devil's in the details, how did that, I mean, was that a struggle?
You know, that's a good question. It's interesting you mentioned like that's something that is hard for me, like putting together a piece of furniture. That's a skill set I don't have. I wish I had those great handy skills. That's something that's a little trickier for me. You know, Dirk, you sometimes I need more time to get certain things done. But I can generally pick up on the case law. If I were, say, an architect or another field, it would probably be a lot harder because I think a lot of people that have some dyslexia and ADD symptoms, they can stand out more in some areas and have deficiencies in other areas. So I make it work. That's one thing about being on my own I like, is that I can kind of go at my own pace to get some of these things done. And something I want to share, Dirk, too, about the practice of law, and this can apply to the business world as well. In the business world, you don't have to be a Fortune 400 person to have a good business career. In the law, you can still have a good career, even if you're not a partner at a prominent international firm, or you're not a Dershowitz or a Darrow or a Jerry Spence or a Johnny Cochran. You can still carve out a good career. And I think that gets forgotten. You know, we hear that term, keep up with the Joneses. You know, just that the kind of the American neighbors that compete. There's a lot of that in lots of other fields as well. But I think people can come to some peace and come to reality. And again, I'm not something for mediocrity. I'm not saying people shouldn't be ambitious, but I think you can have a good career in the law and other fields and maybe not be the Michael Jordan of it.
I get it. I mean, that's kind of like the genius zone. Someone thought, oh, God, Dirk, I'm not a genius. Well, I don't want to come on. Like, this isn't about geniuses that I'm interviewing. It's about being in your flow and like gravitating towards what, you know, you were born into this world. You know, I always say, like, Paul, when you're younger, I remember looking back, and we'll get into this with you a little bit, maybe some signs, but like you had a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever, and 8 hours felt like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. You know, what were those things that just kind of took you away, where you're super present and you really enjoyed it? And I think that's, you know, when I'm interviewing people, I'm certainly not interviewing people who hate their job. You know, I'm interviewing people who are in their flow, and I know you are as well. In terms of, I know you are in your flow. Let's talk about what makes, like, I mean, I know you're a humble guy, but let's talk a little bit about what makes you good at what you do. As like, why you versus the guy next door who's advertising for the same exact type of law? What is it about Paul that kind of differentiates yourself from the pack?
Well, I'm not the only attorney who has these skills, but I care a lot about people. I care a lot about my clients, and I work very hard. If I could I'm not trying to promote myself, but there's some things, some other lawyers, we don't have to focus on that. But for example, I've been spending months and months on this one case. It's a post-settlement issue. I won't bore you, Dirk, with the legal esoteric part of it, but it's an insurance reimbursement issue. And I'm trying to basically save my guy when it comes down to it. I don't know, $5 or $6 grand. And I'm putting in a heck of a lot of time to do that, but I feel it's the right thing to do. So there's things like that where I think I care and I work hard. And I can also sometimes come up with an angle that maybe another lawyer hadn't quite thought of. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be the most successful angle, but I'm a pretty good brainstormer at thinking through different options and cases.
So creative. So you're creative, probably.
I have a creative side. Yeah. I'm not saying that it's always catapulted into amazing results in every single case, but no, I can come up with some ideas. So
yeah, legally creative is what I mean. So not like out of the bounds creative. So what about what about some of the things that, like, you're a smart guy and you knew what you're getting into, you had family that was in this world, this industry. What are some things that have surprised you over the years? You're like, good and bad. I mean, like things like, whoa, did not see this coming. And if I had known, like I struggle sometimes in my career, it's, not to get into what I do, but like there are some core things about what I do that I wish somebody would have articulated to me before I went down this road. I don't know if it would have changed, but it would have been nice to be aware of. What are some things you can say? Maybe we start with the negative or the cautionary things that you can tell somebody right now that's watching that is gung-ho, wants to be a lawyer. They want to get in your exact kind of law and they want to be in private practice. What do they need to know?
Dirk, here's what has surprised me a bit. If I can think of one thing right now, if I had more time, I could think of some other things. One thing that surprised me a bit, and I have good relationships with most of my clients. Overall, I have probably over 90% good ties. I'm not saying they're all my best friends, but decent ties. I check in on some of my former clients. They check in on me. So I have a pretty good relationship with most of my clients. However, what has surprised me, not just about my practice, but some other practices, is the difficulties some attorneys can have connecting with clients and how adversarial the attorney-client relationship can get in certain situations. That part of it has surprised me. And there's probably I don't know, not to get too deep here, maybe some socioeconomic reasons why that happens, whatever. But I was talking to a retired judge about this. My godfather's almost 90, and he brought up some interesting points that in the 50s and 60s, people were kind of more trained to listen to their doctors and lawyers and more to be more obedient to advice they receive. That's just surprised me a little bit that some people who retain you or are thinking about retaining you have a very adversarial view. Some of them are almost looking to want to file a bar complaint or looking for trouble, if I can put it. That surprised me. It hasn't happened to me a lot. But, and that's a lot of behind the scenes attorneys will talk about, Jesus, I'm trying to give him or her advice. And they just won't listen. They're just fighting me on this and that. So that's one thing that has surprised me to some extent.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Never one I thought of. I get that too. Like there's a lot of people in my world that are all about the money and sales and put people in dangerous types of loans. And sometimes if it's a fresh, referral, whatever, there's kind of a dating phase until they actually start getting to know me and trust me. But
right.
What about some of okay, so that's one. Is there anything else that you're like, hey, I'm in the job, it's my career, but I hate this part of the job? I mean, just to get really blunt, is there anything you can think
of? Sometimes what can drive me a little crazy is when I'm trying to work with an opposing party on something very, very basic, like a housekeeping matter that you just need to get resolved. For example, I got a case right now where I can't get this opposing lawyer to agree that his client has been served with a copy of the lawsuit. It's the most, if I can use the word, rudimentary, basic thing. Will you agree your client's been served? And that's something that a lawyer needs to do to protect his client's case, to make sure it's a process, procedural thing. And things like that, when you can't get a housekeeping thing agreed to steal a line from our president. Come on, man. You know what I mean? It's there's just things like that where you're just like, come on, so.
Okay. So when you're talking, I mean, these podcasts, they kind of go different directions,
Sure,
and
sure.
it's not a script, but like you've got, I think I never want to assume, but I keep trying to get in the heads of the people watching this, trying to learn your job and learn the career, is the skill set of just getting along with people. Like, even realtors, when you have a buyer's agent and a listing agent, and they're all going back and forth. And some of the most successful agents I see are the ones who just, whether it's commercial real estate or residential, they just know how to work with other people, maybe competition. But that trait doesn't seem to be absent from success in your world.
No, for sure. And Derek, and there's a Harvard researcher, I think a guy named Dan Goleman wrote a book on this back in the 90s. The EQ can be more important than IQ in the real work world and when it comes to long-term success. Yeah, I try to work with people the best I can. I'm not going to say I never get grouchy a little bit. I'm not going to say that I've connected perfectly with everybody I've ever worked with. But yeah, I try to reach out and connect with people. And I do believe in that old motto, treat people how you want to be treated, even if it's a somewhat adversarial situation. Just try to maintain civility. And again, I'm not going to say I've succeeded all the time in those situations, but I do try to keep in mind you're dealing with other human beings and have their own egos and their own interests. And, a lot of it's just relationships in a lot of ways. So
one of the things that I'm thinking about right now that you're kind of hitting on, well, you're not hitting on it, but you're making me think about it. Okay. So I've had a couple guests that have been really successful in the world of apparel and, clothing, mostly in the ski and snowboarding world. And it's really interesting. They started talking about like their experience with a smaller brand versus a larger brand, in terms of like playing it safe versus, it's all about numbers with the bigger brand, and you don't have a lot of freedom to be really creative. You're just like playing it safe. In the world of law, like I would assume like somebody in your world in terms of private practice, the type of law you do versus working for a big firm, a partner, whatever, it can be night and day. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is there anything you can elaborate on for people, because they might do really well in your side of it and really bad on the other side? Or is it just because you want to be in law doesn't mean that you can fit in every type of law career? I mean, I think you know where I'm going on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I would not be the best transactional attorney. I have a friend of mine is a senior partner at Perkins Coie now, great securities lawyer. That would probably not be my area. I kind of think I kind of get the concept of litigation better. The little irony, though, Dirk, of being a litigation lawyer or being a trial lawyer is you want to litigate, but at the same time, most lawyers are trying to keep their clients out of the courtroom too. So there's a little bit of an interesting contradiction there in a way. But yeah, a lot, and it's not just all about the money. Of course, we all want to pay our bills. We all all lawyers want to get, personal injury lawyers want to get lucrative cases. That goes without saying. But I'll tell you a quick story. I had a case a couple years ago, and I want to share this maybe with some younger people that law is not just all about dollars and cents. She was a disabled veteran, Iraq War combat veteran. And this woman had been in an abusive relationship. She was probably in her early 30s. I represented her a couple of years ago. Iraq War veteran, impressive young woman. I represented her in a personal injury case. And every issue got fought: liability, insurance coverage, damages. It was a dog bite case. And she got bit by this dog pretty good. Now, I was able to help her get, Dirk, a very modest settlement. Believe me, I did not become wealthy from this case, but it felt very, very good helping this woman get some of her bills paid, helping her get, a recovery, nothing amazing, but something that was fair and just. So that case is just one example where, again, I did not become wealthy from that case by any means, but it felt good trying to help someone who was in a jam. And I thought she was a very deserving person too. So
that brings up another thing I want to touch on in terms of, I'll ask the question, we'll come back to it, but there's, as far as like, okay, so then what is normal? How many cases a year, do you do? And how do you become wealthy? Like, I mean, I want to get in a little bit about not your compensation, but just how lawyers make money. And, is a lawyer supposed to have 10 cases on, working simultaneously? We'll get back to that in a second. But the initial question was, then do you have any advice to somebody that's interested in law? But as far as trying to figure out what slice of law they want to get into, whether it's big corporate law, real estate law, what you do, big company, private practice, like, I don't think a 27, 28, 29-year-old may have that wisdom. And if there's somebody that doesn't have friends or contacts or family they can lean on, and they're just really struggling, like, what the hell am I going to do? I just want to be in law, but they need to probably be smart about the law they pursue. Any advice you can give to somebody about making sure they're going down the right road in law?
Yeah, Dirk, that's a good question. I mean, I think in law school, students can take courses and see what courses kind of strike their interests. There's that route. I think when you're in law school, you can do internships or externships. I think a lot of it too, Dirk, is working with quality people. No matter what area of law you're in, find people that you're working with, whether you're on your own solo or whether you're at a firm, that are quality people. And I think that can make a big difference, no matter what law you're in. But yeah, I think but back to your question, I think it's good for a prospective lawyer to sample some different foods in the buffet. Try maybe do some contract work at a firm that's involved in business transaction law. Maybe do some contract work in a criminal defense firm. There are ways of with my buffet analogy to try to taste some different things and see what interests you.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's important. Getting back to like your day, and you talked about you didn't get wealthy on one deal, but like, how does it work in private practice? Like, is it normal to have one case you're working on that lasts 3 weeks, or 10 cases that vary between a week and 7 months? Like, what's a typical workload for an attorney in your type of law?
Well, a lot of my cases are personal injury, and some can get resolved within 5 or 6 months after the incident. Some can go on for years. It really depends. So it depends what area of law you're in. Like, criminal defense lawyers can get cases that generally can resolve maybe within the same year they get the case, or even sooner. So it just depends there a lot. Then I know business transaction lawyers have like ongoing clients that like ongoing business clients. I mean, there's some lawyers only have one client. Some can be in-house counsel. So that's one thing about the law. Back to I don't want to overdo this, but back to the buffet analogy, there are lots of different ways of sampling it and doing it. So
like for you, for what you do, like, would you have, like, in a given year, you might have a case that goes 3 years, 4 years, 2 years?
Oh, for sure. I have cases that can go even longer than that. A lot of these cases, like civil cases, a lawsuit's filed, there can be trial date extensions. You can also sometimes wait to file the suit a couple years after you get the case, maybe negotiations fail, whatever. So some of these cases can go on for quite a while. I had a lawyer friend who passed, and Dick worked on this Dow Winders case, this radiation case, I believe, in Eastern Washington. I think that case may still be going on. It's one of those cases, I think, started in the 80s. I don't have all the details of it, but some of these cases go on a long time. So
maybe, I mean, gosh, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. So would you be able to work multiple cases simultaneously, or do you have to like jump in and do one and just be all in on one?
I'll tell you, Dirk, when you're in trial, you're focusing on that one case. When a lawyer is in trial, he or she is generally, the practice is suspended in some ways. It can be a very 24/7 ordeal. But most of my cases, like today, I did a little work this morning on a couple cases after this podcast and work on some more. Most of the time, I'm just juggling all these different cases. And the law can be very deadline driven, like a witness disclosure deadline or this deadline. And that goes back to the administrative part of it. It's a very deadline driven field. And
so when you get, sorry to interrupt, but when you get when there's an opportunity that presents itself, you might have to weigh the fact that, hey, I've got 3 things like this now. They're all similar. I can't bring on another one of these deals, but I can do this one because it's totally different. Maybe it's not so time sensitive. Do you have to do that kind of juggling when deals are presented, or is it more simple than that? Like, nope, I've got
So
five.
definitely some juggling. And if a good case comes in, most lawyers are going to figure out a way to handle it, unless they're about to retire. And I can bring in contract lawyers. And what I do sometimes is I associate with other attorneys. One, we know Chris Davis, we worked on some cases together over the years. So if I get a certain case that for one reason or another, it may be hard for me to do completely on my own, there's some excellent friends and colleagues I have that I can collaborate with and kind of create a law firm together on that one case.
So I'm glad you brought Chris up. I hear him a lot. He does a lot of advertising, and I think there's another guy I hear, I won't mention his name, but when it comes to advertising, like, is it just a preference? Like, this is how I want to market myself. Like, I don't know how much advertising you do, but I hear Chris all the time on sports radio. What's the determinant of, like even in lending, I have people that do advertising and I don't do a lot of that type of advertising, but like, why does Chris do so much versus the other person? And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you're promoting yourself or you're advertising your services. What goes into that thinking in terms of how I'm going to get my name out there?
I've done some advertising over the years, Dirk, a little bit of radio here and there. A lot of it is, I don't know all the internal reasons why Chris advertises, but he's been very successful. And a lot of it's, budgetary reasons and all sorts of reasons why lawyers choose to advertise. I will share some with you. We hear about the stereotype of the ambulance chasing lawyers and all that. And and I'm not saying every plaintiff's personal injury lawyer is the most honorable person in the world, but one reason lawyers in my field tend to advertise more than, say, corporate attorneys is we're representing the masses. We're representing housewives in Mercer Island. We're representing laborers in the Central District or Ballard, or representing people from Sumner or Shoreline or whatever. So when you have a personal injury practice, you're going to be getting it's a different business model where you usually don't have an ongoing business client. So I think that's one reason why you see criminal lawyers or family law lawyers or personal injury lawyers advertising more, is the model sort of calls for hitting the masses and trying to bring in some new clients.
That's a really, really good point. I never thought of it like that. Like, I call it B2C, business to consumer, versus B2B, business to business. But like, I'm in a similar world because anybody that I bump into might be a client who owns real estate, needs to build, refi, buy, whatever. But if you're selling, blockchain technology, you're probably selling to a definitive channel. So when you're thinking about getting into law, it might be worth it to you're a social guy. You were were you Lambda or Fiji or
Lambda Chi was my house? Yeah.
Yeah. Lambda. And it's sometimes, it's a popularity contest. Like, the people with the most friends wins. And that sounds cliche, but when you know a lot of people and they like you, meaning they respect you, because I'm sure there's some people that are real popular, but no one would ever do a loan with them or do, hire them as their lawyer. But like, when you have a network of contacts, it might be worth considering on what type of law or career you fall into. Because if you don't know anybody and you're in my world or, a job that you need to market yourself, you might be kind of screwed. You know what I mean? I talk about lending where you might have the best lender in the world move to Seattle. They don't know anybody. That might be a problem. So I would think it'd be wise to consider, are you a network person? Do you have contacts? And maybe do these contacts like you and respect you? Do they think of you as a trusted source? I don't know if you've ever thought about your type of law, you got into it for those reasons, because if you don't know anybody, I would think your type of law might be an issue.
Dirk, that's an interesting point. I never thought of it that way, but I do know some very successful lawyers that are not the most extroverted people, that are really, really talented at what they do. And there's actually some trial lawyers out there, Dirk, that in trial are incredible and amazing, but having conversations with them, they can be a little bit, maybe even aloof, or maybe not as social. You can find actors like that or professional athletes that on the field or on the screen, they're incredible, but they can be a lot more laid back or maybe less personable in other settings. So your question is one I never thought of, but I think there's some trade-offs. I know some attorneys who are not very social that have excellent business success, and I know some that are quite social, that maybe their business success hasn't been quite as good. So there's a lot of intangibles there. But I never really thought of that's an interesting question you asked.
No, I would assume like in any trade, you have the spectrum of super social to total introverts. I'm just kind of really talking about when you as an attorney are trying to go get business and market yourself, I would think maybe after time, you just develop a great reputation and the business comes. But initially, if you're pursuing what Paul is doing, you might want to think about, okay, day one, you come out of law school, you hang your, you have your office, and now what? Who do you go talk to? Who do you go reach out to talk about your services? And if you don't know anybody, it could be an issue. So just something to consider. I've seen a lot of people struggle in my business who don't know anybody. And after a while, like there's no group or network that they can leverage. So we don't have a ton of time left, Paul, but I wanted to also touch on maybe one or two things you absolutely love about your job that, I'm not trying to push people away from pursuing law. I think it's good for you to be realistic, but I also, I'd like to see people talk about what they really enjoy.
You know what, Dirk, to answer that question, I like when I can help a client get a good result when they have a problem. I gave you that one story a few minutes ago about that injured Iraq War female veteran. She was stuck in a situation. I felt very good. I was able to help her get this issue resolved. So that's the part I find most satisfying, is when I know that I helped a client get through an ordeal. That's probably the most satisfying thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, impact, meaning, I think a lot of these things, again, I don't want to assume, but when you're younger and you're coming out of school and you have debt and you just want to get a job, get your own place, get a car, maybe you have a family, you're thinking probably different. But I think it's important to take inventory of like, are you someone that, like, I bet you made impacts and there was meaning in your life before you even were thinking of law school. So I think it's important to kind of think about your career, and is it going to give you those types of benefits, those types of experiences? Like,
right.
For me, this podcast is a way that I feel like I can give back. I really want to help people make better decisions about their life work. And you and I both know how much time people spend in their careers. So if you're in a career you hate, that's kind of a sad thing, in my opinion. Okay. So a couple things. I know you work hard. I know there's a lot of hours, but one of the things I've admired about you is just this podcast. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I think it's good for people to see Paul and listen to this, because not only is he very dedicated and successful in the world of law, but he's also carved out this really cool, and I don't want to call it a hobby because it might be more than that, but a podcaster. And you've been doing this way longer than me, and you've had very, very impressive guests. Like I watched some of them and I'm like, man, how did you get that guy or that gal on? And I'm impressed. So talk to us a little bit about where that came from. Was that a love of sports, or was that just, I don't know, what is it about sports and podcasting that why did this come up?
Dirk, I appreciate your kind words. I'll tell you how the thing kind of got going. And it's been an interesting experience. As I told you off the air, right now it's on hold. I plan on getting it back up. There's a few internal reasons why it's been on hold, but I'm in the process of hopefully having a show up in the near future. Here's the story. So back in the 2007, 2006 era, I got connected to the Save Our Sonics organization, and another lawyer, another friend of mine, Aaron Wolf. We both went to a couple of their meetings, and suddenly all these legal issues were coming up. And so what happened is, through Save Our Sonics, I was getting called by some local media organizations to comment on some of the legalities surrounding the relocation battle, the contracts issue, some of those issues surrounding the Sonics relocation battle. So I was doing some news on KJR and 710 and some of the local news stations. So what happened, Dirk, I never even thought I would do a podcast. I never thought I would do anything where I would doing what you're doing now, being a show host. But a friend of mine named Tony Benton was at Clear Channel for many years, and he was a KJR person. He had a show there. And so Tony started a station called Rainier Avenue Radio, and he approached me about hosting a show. And I thought he was joking. I mean, the first 2 or 3 times I thought, because Tony's sort of a joke around guy, I wasn't even I didn't even take it seriously. I literally kind of laughed at it. But he approached like the third time. He goes, I want you to host a sports show at the new station I'm starting. So that started in 2017, and I've kept it tied to Rainier Avenue Radio. I've kind of got off my own with the podcast, but I still have sent them my shows and have kept a relationship with them. That's kind of how it started. I got involved in something that was law related, but not completely related to law. And it kind of evolved into something else. I think there's a little kind of life lesson there that you can get involved in a sailing club or get involved in a ski club, or there's all sorts of things that a lawyer, another person can do that can maybe add to some more experiences. And I would call, by the way, Dirk, my podcast is a startup. I call it a startup hobby. So that's how I define it.
What's the name of it again?
It's called Sports Untold.
Cool. And then so your initial hook into it was more from a legality perspective, not like I'm a diehard sports guy.
Oh, I'm a sports fan, but I guess the way my show got launched has a story to it where I got involved in SabreSonics, and I was asked by some local networks to comment on some of the legalities, and then it just kind of turned into hosting a sports show. But I'm a fan, but I like sports, Dirk. At the same time, I'm not going to say I read every box score every day, though.
So. Yeah, I will tell you, I had an internship with the Sonics, and then fortunate, my mom married a guy who had courtside. And the greatest thing is his kids were at Wazoo when I was coming out of college, so they couldn't go, which meant I could go. And there was probably couple seasons I went to 25 games, 30 games, and I had 4 seats. So I'd take my buddies, and I was the poorest guy in the first 20 rows for sure. But I tell you, it was one of the greatest experiences. Like I would call people and they would know, oh, Dirk's probably and it was like talking to the players, the experience of being up close like that. So I was very passionate about the Sonics. And so, I remember those interviews from Clay Bennett, and he talked about he's doing everything he can to keep him here. And I knew in the back of my head, like that was not, I didn't believe him. And so I still hope that we can get him back because, I don't even follow the NBA anymore just because I have no team. And I think that would change if we got somebody back.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to team back at some point. We'll have to see what happens there. But I really enjoy. I remember seeing you at Sonics games years ago too, and I worked at the Sonics one time as well years ago. But I remember you, I think we were there at the same time. But right. I think Seattle is excited with the Kraken right now, and the Mariners and the Huskies, and we have almost every major sports team right now in Seattle except for the NBA. So
I know it's a great city. I think but the reality of Seattle is there's so many great things to do. I mean, in terms of outdoors. So, you get certain cities that are diehard on their sports teams because there's not a lot going on, right? And I think we have so many things to offer, which can be challenging. But I'm pretty darn sure that if we brought back an NBA team, it would get a lot of love. So before we wrap this up, I always ask a couple questions to each guest, the same ones. One of them is just like, if you could go back in time, rewind this whole thing, coming out of Seattle U, and was it 97 or close to, would you do anything different? I mean, would you change the type of law that you pursued? Would you not get into private practice, or would you do it all again the same way?
Gosh, Dirk, what a question. You asked really good questions. What a question. There's a couple things I think I would have pursued differently looking back. I look back at some jobs and how I pursued them. I probably could have handled myself better in some ways in how I went about trying to obtain certain positions. I also wonder sometimes, Dirk, what if I went back to DC for a year or two and maybe tried to work as a legislative aide for a member of Congress? I sometimes wonder if my career could have taken some different turns if I did something like that. But yeah, there's a couple that there were frankly 1 or 2 jobs that I took that probably were not the best fit. And I sort of knew going in they weren't the best fit, but I just was eager to have a job. So looking back, there's probably a job or 2 I shouldn't have taken. But that's a good question. And sometimes I wonder, I'm sure we all have these things in life where you chose to go down this door. What if you went to that other door 2 feet away? What would have happened? So I sometimes wonder if maybe earlier in my career, if maybe I could have tried going a different route on a couple things.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
it's speculative though, Dirk, because you don't know what happened if I went another route though. You know what I mean? So
no, it's true. I mean, I asked the question because sometimes someone has a real interesting answer, but most of the time it's, it's predictable. Like, I think I would have done it pretty similar. I think too, for younger people that are struggling, my advice, and you can jump in, Paul, is to lower the bar a little bit, because sometimes it's like dating. I think dating is it's a great analogy or a metaphor for life. It's sometimes you just got to have some jobs that you don't like because it teaches you what you do like. And, so there's no wrong route to go. I mean, life is about, experiences and learning but taking action. This is the dance that I have a hard time with my podcast. Is action is crucial. Like, just get out there. But before you get out there, my hope is just to spend a little time trying to really think about what you would enjoy versus just jumping into something for the wrong reason, like because your dad or your mom wants you to be a doctor. Take inventory of who you are, because you're different than anybody else in this world. We are. And I think when you align your career with your genuine interests and passions, I think good things can happen. My last question is, if you could do anything, and I know this is kind of like a dream question, but let's just say you can't be in the world of law. Let's just say it's not an option. Is there a dream job that you have, like, that you think, you laugh about because there's no way it would ever happen? But if you could do anything, do you have a job, or would it be in your current role?
Well, first of all, I will say it's about dating, which applies to other things in life. It's not for the thin skin, that's for sure. But
Sure.
But what would I do? If I could theoretically host a podcast that could, completely pay for everything, where I could hit on just subject matters every day that really fascinate me, sports or even things outside of sports, that would be a lot of fun. But the reality is there's not a whole lot of people that have those kind of positions where they're making, they can really make big money doing, hosting a show or something like that. But one thing I do like about podcasts is I love it how you and I and so many others can have our own shows now. You don't have to be a radio host at a major network to be able to host a show. I like it that there's something, I guess I'll use the word egalitarian about it, that you can be a regular person and get a show together. And so I think that's really cool in a lot of ways. But back to your question, it would, if I was doing something else, I mean, I always liked journalism. I took a journalism class from Mr. Jacobson at Roosevelt. It was very inspiring. See where life goes. I don't love everything about the practice of law, but you kind of get in routine and have some idea of how to handle things. So I don't want to purport that I love everything about it by any means, but I think I'll be at it though for at least some number more years. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You don't have to be in love with your job. My hope is, like, my dad's his voice is like, that's what it's work. It's not supposed to be fun, son. It's go to work, roll up your sleeves and all. But I do believe that your career can be something different. I think if you choose and put yourself in an environment that leverages your uniqueness, what's innate, I think I see people in my industry and other industries that separate themselves from the pack. And it's not because they're smarter, work harder, whatever. They just really like what they're doing. And when you're running a race, you want to win. It's very different feeling than running a race that you don't want to win, if that makes any sense. And so my encouragement, and I think Paul mirrored this a little bit as well, is, you're not going to love everything about your job, but, don't get into a job for the wrong reasons, and really try to, I should say, identify what is unique about yourself and realize, I mean, if you look at the hours that you spend in your career over your lifespan, it's a lot. It's probably more than anything. And it's, life's short, and I'm a big fan of living it and enjoying it. Before I end, is there anything on the tip of your tongue that, this is all about advice and helping people make better decisions? Is there anything you feel compelled to say to the audience before we end this?
Yeah, no, Dirk, just as sort of alluding to what you mentioned a minute ago, be yourself. And like what you and I are talking about, there's no perfect job. I think that's something that people forget. And also, I'm not recommending that people be oddballs, but don't be afraid to be a little different. Don't be afraid to be a little unique. It's okay to try maybe some different approaches, and you can be a little different in how you go about something. And the other thing I want to mention, what I mentioned earlier, if I can repeat it again, is again, I'm not advocating mediocrity, but don't feel that you have to be the most fanciest attorney in America, or even in your zip code for that matter. You can have a good career and represent people well, and you don't have to be the wealthiest or the most prominent to have a good career.
I love that advice. And I don't know if I butchered it. I want to make sure I heard it right, but like, be yourself, be a little goofy, be an oddball, be different, be unique, whatever. I mean, you will attract your tribe, your people. Truth is the best script. I have a coach that I've had that I'm actually doing a podcast with later today that says truth is the best script. And I see people who try to be someone else or see someone really successful and they try to be that person. But I think what Paul's saying is be yourself, even if it's, unique or odd or whatever, because you'll attract the right kind of clients, people, partners, whatever. Is that kind of along the lines?
Yeah, be yourself within reason. I'm not recommending someone just be completely crazy, but don't be afraid to try some different things. And again, we have such the keeping up with the Joneses mentality. I see it with college admissions. I don't have any kids of my own, but I see like my niece going through the college admissions situation right now. And there's so many good college options out there. I mean, so many people can have great careers. You don't have to go to Harvard or Yale to have a great career. And I think that if I can use that as an analogy too, that there's so many different ways of having success and having happiness. And I don't think one has to follow the exact script that someone else thinks they should follow. So
that's awesome advice. My daughter's a senior and I can relate to the whole college thing big time. As far as there's some kids out there that have 15, 20 applications, and it's kind of boggles my mind, because I think when I went through it, I was thinking about playing football in college and I had some head injuries. And so that kind of ended that for me. I was going to go to some smaller schools and play. And then when that happened, I just UW was right there in my backyard. And I'm really glad I made that decision. Okay. So one question, I forgot one more.
Sure, go ahead.
Because I find this really interesting. And I'm going to start asking this question with all my guests is, I know there's different levels of, people are super alarmist, but AI, chat GPT 4 or whatever, like the future of AI in your career as far as just, information. I mean, is that something that's on your radar? I know we're not going to have robots in trial, but as far as the research, the time to gather information, do you ever think about AI and how it relates to law?
Gosh, Dirk, I hadn't really thought of it in the context of practicing law, but you wonder if we're going to get to some point where a client could hire maybe a robot to get to represent them. I mean, it sounds, at least now, theoretically possible. Even a couple of years ago, it sounded like no way. My hunch, though, tells me that even with advanced technology and all this AI stuff and this robotic stuff, I think there's still going to be a presence for real life human lawyers. I think there's still going to be a role for attorneys. But maybe we'll talk a decade from now, Dirk, and I'll have to reverse what I just said. So.
I think you're right. I think where it's going to replace jobs is in the data gathering, the speed to which it can get information. So my assumption about lawyers is they do a lot of research, gathering data. And my guess is AI might be able to help facilitate or expedite that process. But I don't know. It's a fascinating topic for me. And I'm totally a beginner on it, but it's got me really thinking about, I'm doing a podcast on careers, and I'm wondering how many of these careers are going to be around in 20, 30 years based on AI, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, I really appreciate it, Paul. You were great. I think you threw out a lot of really good information. It's the example is, I know what lawyers, I know about law, but like you were talking about things that I never thought of. And that's really the goal here, is to open up people's eyes to what they can expect if they pursue this career. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Dirk, I really enjoyed it, and good luck and continual success to your podcast. I like the theme of your podcast, what you're doing, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, buddy.
You too.